Page 435. Indian English Literature continued. The term Indian English literature, formerly known as Indo-Anglian or Indo-English literature, connotes literature written in English by Indian authors. It remarkably differs from Anglo-Indian literature, which was created by Englishmen as men who were fascinated by her romantic and exotic charm. They made India the main theme of their writings, that is, quote, for the most part, merely English literature marked by Indian local color, unquote, stop, para. Indian English literature is the outcome of the cross-fertilization of two fruitful cultures, Indian and English. It is literature created by Indians both before and after independence. All Indian writers who wrote in English since the days of Raja Rammohn Roy down to our own time belong to Indian English literature. It spontaneously and powerfully expresses varying shades of emotions, thoughts and feelings typical to the genius and character of India. Indian English literature is, quote, a curious native eruption, an expression of the practical no less than creative genius of the Indian people, stop. Indians have written and are writing in English for communicating with one another and with the outside world, for achieving self-expression too artistically, using English necessary or necessarily, in an Indian way, unquote, stop. English, which has been domesticated and nativized in India, has been one of our own languages like Kannada, Punjabi, Marathi, Bengali, etc. Page 436. Hence, literature written in Indianized or nativized English is Indian English literature. It bears an indelible stamp of Indianness, which implies, quote, life attitudes, unquote, quote, modes of perception, unquote, quote, life patterns, unquote, quote, behavior of the people, unquote, and, quote, traditions that have emerged over the years in India, unquote, stop. Gauri Deshpande asserts, quote, we are right in asserting that we are Indian poets writing in English, stop. Our landscape is Indian, our thought is molded by our political, social, economic and philosophical scene, unquote, stop. Indianness or the Indian experience of life cannot be restricted to rigid definitions, as its expression varies from person to person, writer to writer, poet to poet and novelist to novelist, stop. It is this richness and variety of experience which imparts color and beauty to Indian English literature. It embodies the Indian sensibility which has come down to us through the early Vedic period. Para. Indian English literature is a well-established literary discipline which has an international reading public. Para. Poetry. The early poetry of the 19th century, 1820 to 1900, is reminiscent of English Romantic and Victorian poets, Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats, Tennyson, and Swinburne. The great pioneers like Derozio and M. Dart imitated the manner and method of Byron and Scott. It, quote, began with verse, romances and lyrics written in the romantic vein, vein, stop. Victorian poetry influenced the Dutt family album, 1870, Ram Sharma, R.C. Dutt, Manomohan Ghosh, etc. In the last quarter of the 19th century, a sheaf, S-H-E-A-F, gleaned, G-L-E-A-N-E-D, in French fields by Oro Dutt, Toru Dutt, R.C. Dutt's Lays of Ancient India, and Manomohan Ghosh's Love Songs and Elegies have Romantic and Victorian influences. The English decadent poets left their impact on the early poetry of Mohan Ghosh, Sri Aurobindo and Sarojini Naidu. Para. Early Indian English poetry, though imitative of the manner and method of English Romantic and Victorian poetry, mainly dealt with the Indian or Oriental themes. K.R.S. Iyengar points out that early poets, quote, were imitative, derivative, they imitated the forms and rhythms of English poetry, and they derived their themes from Indian history, myths and legends, but they also tried to forge something distinctive and new, unquote, stop. Para. The Great Pioneers, 1820 to 1900. Henry Derozio, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Shoshi Chandra Dutt, Ram Sharma, R.C. Dutt, Kashi Prasad Ghosh, Mohan Ghosh and B.M. Malabari were the pioneers and trendsetters in Indian English poetry of 19th century. Para. Henry Louis, Louis, Vivian, Vivian, Derozio, Derozio. The son of a Portuguese father and an Indian mother, Derozio was a pioneer both in poetry and journalism. He edited and published the East Indian. He taught English literature in Hindu College, Kolkata, when he was hardly 18. He was a pioneer in poetry. Although his poetry was influenced by English Romantic poets, patriotism and love for India distinguish his sonnets. The Harp of India and To India My Native Land. His poetry constitutes first expression of, quote, Indian nationalist thought besides revealing the high source of patriotism, unquote, stop. His finest work, The Fakir of Jangira, Junghwera, is a full of Byronic echoes, but expressed Derozio's ardor for social reform. According to C. Paul Verghese, he, quote, was the first Indian to attempt romantic poetry in English, and that he made small start in the right direction to give expression to Indian personality through the medium of English, unquote, stop. Para. Kashi Prasad Ghosh, 1809 to 1873, edited an English weekly, The Hindu Intelligence. His memorable work, The Shahir, Shir, and Other Poems, 1830, shows the influence of Scott's The Lady of the Last Minstrel. He was one of the first Indians to publish a regular volume of English verse. Para. Michael Madhusudan Dutt, 1827 to 1873, who embraced Christianity and married a European lady, was a more gifted poetic artist than Derozio and Ghosh. In his famous work, The Captive Lady, which is a long metrical romance, he describes the love story of Prithviraj and Sanyukta. He made a conscious effort to use Indian imagery and Indian sentiments. His vision of the past, poor in poetry, is a justification of his faith in Christianity. Saturn's sonnet imitates Miltonic imagery and simile. Dutt created Indian atmosphere and expressed Indian sentiment. Para. Ramesh Chandra Dutt, Romes, H. Chunder Dutt, 1848 to 1909, a member of ICS, was a man of versatile genius and achievements. He was a great master of English prose, and he wrote History of Civilization in Ancient India, Economic History of India, and India in the Victorian Age. Page 437. As a poet, Dutt did not write original poetry. He rendered into English verse the Ramayana and the Mahabharata in a style which is noticeable for stateliness, dignity, solemnity, epic grandeur and lucidity. He imparted a touch of originality to his translation. He skillfully adopted the meter employed by Tennyson in Locksley Hall in the translation of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. He also translated into English selections from the Rig Veda, the Upanishad, Buddhist literature, Kalidasa's Kumar Sambhava, and Bharavi's Kiratarjunya. Para. Behramji Malabari, 1853-1912, his collection of poems is known as The Indian Muse in English Garb, GARB. His poems cover a wide range of subjects. The state of Hindu female life depicts the sorrows of an Indian widow. A sketch is autobiographical. The Welcome, an occasional poem, was written to welcome the Prince of Wales in 1875. Where India is a patriotic poem in which the poet bewails over the lost glories of ancient India. Malabari's language is noticeable for, quote, fresh and felicitous expression, unquote, stop. Para. Manomohan Ghosh, 1869-1924, educated in London, Manchester and Oxford, befriended Lawrence Binyon, Binyon, Stephen Phillis, Philis, and Oscar Wilde. As a poet, he was influenced by Wordsworth, Milton, Landor, and Keats. He was the elder brother of Sri Aurobindo. He served as Professor of English in Presidency College, Kolkata. Para. His wife's chronic illness, his own health and blindness added to his inner gloom and suffering. Manomohan, a heartbroken poet, felt himself alien in the land of his forefathers. He was a gifted and versatile poet. He started composing lyrics at the age of 17 and contributed poems to Fox's Family Magazine. Some of his early poems appeared in Prime Vara, to which Lawrence Binyon, Stephen Phillis, and Arthur Griff also contributed. Love Songs and Elegies, 1898, a collection of Ghosh's lyrics on love, nature, and death, is characterized by nostalgia, melancholy, pathos, and elegiac note. Songs of Life and Death, published posthumously in 1926, is a collection of 75 poems on love, death, nature, seasons, and emotional crisis. His selected poems, 1874, comprises some extracts from his unpublished works, Perseus the Gorgon Slayer, Nala and Damayanti, and Adam Alarmed in Paradise. Ghosh's poetry is conspicuous for a variety of themes. He was a Hellenist. He was a classicist. His songs of life and death and selected poems are imbued in classical spirit and abound in classical allusions. As a poet, he does not interpret Indian thought and sensibility to the West like Tagore and Sri Aurobindo, but as an interpreter of Hellenic spirit to India, he stands unrivaled in Indian English poetry. He was a great poetic craftsman who deftly used various poetic forms: lyric, sonnet, epic, poetic drama, ode, and elegy. Sturge, Sturge Moore, Moore, admired his, quote, wonderful sense of the beauty of English words and rhythms, unquote, stop. Walter de la Mare admired the, quote, verbal music, unquote, or, quote, the quality of sound underlying the words, unquote, in his poetry. Sri Aurobindo writes, colon, quote, he was a conscientious, conscientious artist of word and rhyme, almost painfully careful about technique, unquote, stop, para. Nobokisen, Nobokisen, Ghosh's also known as Ram Sharma, The Last Day and the Bhagavad Gita, Sir Jyotinder Mohan Tagore's Rajput Soldier's Farewell, Nagesh Vishwanath's Spies, The Angel of Misfortune, and the Dutt Family Album, a collection of about 200 poems composed by the Dutt family consisting of Govind Chandra Dutt, Ganesh Chandra Dutt, Girish Chandra Dutt and Harchandra Dutt also deserve mention. Girish Chandra Dutt, spelt as Greece, also published a separate volume of poetry entitled Cherry Blossom. Para. Saint Poets. Swami Vivekananda 1863 to 1902 and Swami Ramtirtha 1873 to 1906 were the pioneers of the saint poetry which comes down to us from the early ages of the Vedas. The Upanishads and the great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which were composed by rishis, embodying the spiritual heritage of India. The two illustrious saints who were well versed with the use of English composed beautiful poems soaked in India's mysticism, spiritualism and Vedantic wisdom. Both these saint poets belong to the Indian saint poetry of the school of Kabir, Tulsi, Sur, Mira, Tukaram, Dadu, Nanak, etc. Vivekananda's memorable mystical and Vedantic lyrics are An Interesting Correspondence, The Blessed Dream, The Living God, To an Early Violet, Kali the Mother, To the Awakened India, The Song of the Sannyasin, etc. Stop. Besides, On the Sea's Bosom, A Song of Creation, A Song on Samadhi, The Dance of Shiva, A Song I Sing to Thee, A Hymn to the Divinity of Sri Ramakrishna, etc. Stop. Are some of the poems he translated into English from Sanskrit and Bengali. All his poems are imbued with spiritualism of a high order. Page 438. All his poems reveal pure spiritual wisdom. He realized God in his own self. Quote, And you are here, my love, my all, exclamation. And I was searching thee, exclamation, unquote. Para. God is in all and all things are in him. His poems are also remarkable for love of nature, which is the sanctuary of peace and joy. Vivekananda was endowed with a sharp aesthetic sense which finds expression in the flawless craftsmanship of his poetry. His command over English imparts simplicity, clarity, gracefulness, picturesqueness and suggestiveness to his poetic style. Swami Ramatirtha was greatly influenced by Vivekananda. He was a great poet not only of Urdu and Persian but of English also. His poems are a marvel of religious depth and sincere expressiveness of the self-mysticism, spirituality and love of nature are the main characteristics of his poetry. His rapturous lyrics, which have been collected as the poems of Rama, are reminiscent of the profound mystical poetry of the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Their abiding contribution to the religious experience of mankind. Vivekananda and Ramtirtha have, quote, deftly and skillfully nationalized English to express the Indian cultural and spiritual ethos, stop. Simple and common words, with suggestive and concrete quality, create an atmosphere of holiness which runs through the Gita and the Upanishads in their poetry, Some Indian words like Maya, Prakriti, Om Tat Sat Om, etc., which reveal the philosophy of the Gita, have been used by Vivekananda and Ram Tirtha, unquote, stop. They influenced the poetry of Sri Aurobindo and Paramahansa Yoganand, the two renowned Indian saint poets of the 20th century, and the poetry of Rabindranath Tagore. Para. Torudat. Torudat, quote, the inheritor of unfulfilled renown, unquote, and, quote, the frail exotic blossom of song, unquote, was nurtured in an atmosphere of, quote, sweetness and light, unquote, stop. She learned from her mother about the cultural greatness of India. She read the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Shakuntala, the Vishnu Puran, and the Bhagavad Gita. These readings, quote, gave her woman's imagination free play, unquote, stop. She sang of the glorious vision of her motherland in her Ancient Legends and Ballads of Hindustan, published posthumously in 1882. In a sheaf gleaned in French fields, she translated about the 157 poems of about 75 French poets. She successfully handled her material. With her mastery over both English and French, most of her renderings seem almost as articulate as original. Her masterpiece, The Ancient Legends and Ballads of Hindustan, may be classified into two parts. The first part consists of Savitri, the legend of Dhruva, Lakshman, Jogadhya, Uma, the royal ascetic and the Hind, Battu, Buttoo, Sindhu and Prahlad, stop. These poems deal with themes taken from Indian mythology and reveal Toru's Indianness. The second part contains 7 miscellaneous poems. Near Hastings, Bogmari, Baugmaree, The Lotus, Our Casuarina Tree, France, 1870, The Tree of Life, and On the Flyleaf Erckmann, ERCKMANN Chartrians, CHATRIAN', Chatrian's novel, Madame Therese. These poems express her personal moods and feelings. These poems show that in spite of her conversion into Christianity, she had imbibed the true essence of Hindu religion and culture, partly by heritage and partly by training. Para. The narrative poems in this volume may be called ballad. The miscellaneous poems are highly imaginative and lyrical. Lotus and Bogmari are well-written sonnets and reveal her love for nature. Torudat exhibited great ability and originality to bring Indian English poetry to a high level of poetic excellence. She, first of all, composed poetry which showed depth of feelings, sensitiveness to nature and color, flawless narrative art, vivid characterization, and finished technique. She also revealed to the West the soul of India through the medium of poetry. She is a skilled poetic craftsman, and her technical skill is exhibited in metrical arrangement, diction, imagery, and adroit employment of various verse genres. Her poetic diction is characterized by simplicity, ease, and vigor. Oates, a famous critic, observes, quote, her English poetry displayed real creative and imaginative power and almost flawless technical skill, unquote. Padmini Sengupta calls her, quote, a classic writer, unquote, who, quote, placed her country and was the first to do so on the international map of letters, unquote, stop. The era of political awakening 1901 to 1947. The era was characterized by political unrest, national awakening and social reformation. The British government neglected the interest of Indians and damaged Indian industries by implementing laissez-faire, Laissez-faire, and free trade. The Queen's Proclamation of November 1858, issued after the revolt of 1857, marked the beginning of a turbulent age. Stop, page 439. The feeling of national awareness developed among Indians living even in remote and distant parts of the country. With the introduction of new education, the liberal and humanitarian ideas of the West, and the knowledge of Western democratic institutions, enlightened Indians, and they demanded freedom from the tyranny of the British rule. The feeling of growing discontent and bitterness between the ruler and the ruled resulted in the formation of Indian National Congress in 1885. The new spirit soon intensified into political awakening, and various organizations such as British India Association, Bengal British India Society, and British Indian Association of Kolkata began to air the grievances and discontent of India. In the beginning, AIC was a body of moderates, but the growing government indifference and consequent discontent among Indians paved the way for radicals who, under the leadership of Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Sri Aurobindo, controlled the functioning of the Congress. Tilak, whom Sir Valentine Chirol of the Times of India called, quote, the father of Indian unrest, unquote, gave the battle cry, quote, Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it, unquote, stop. Tilak, along with Lala Lajpat Rai and Bipin Chandra Pal, dominated the political scene during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. His mission was to lay the foundation of future India on sound Indian traditions and values. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Bande Mataram became, quote, the reviving mantra of India's awakened nationhood, unquote, stop. Lord Curzon mischievously divided Hindus and Muslims, moderates and extremists. Para. In the wake of the First World War, the British government assured Indians to provide a responsible self-government after the cessation of hostilities. But at the end of the war, the Rowlatt Act, curtailing personal liberties of Indian citizens, was passed. In order to brutally suppress mass upsurge against this Black Act, the British government let loose a reign of terror which climaxed in the British and barbaric massacre of countless of unarmed citizens in Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. At this juncture, M.K. Gandhi, who had been in Satyagraha movement in South Africa, appeared on the political horizon of India in 1915. After the ghastly tragedy of the Jallianwala Bagh, he launched the first countrywide non-cooperation movement in 1920, the year Tilak died. Soon Gandhi became the mass leader who championed the cause of freedom with the weapons of ahimsa, satyagraha and non-cooperation. The Gandhian non-violent movement was successful in Champaran, Kaira and Ahmednagar. He created an unprecedented and extraordinary awakening and awareness among the masses. Para. An ardent champion of Hindu-Muslim unity, Mahatma Gandhi supported the Khilafat movement, and with the help and support of the masses, he earnestly began the non-violent non-cooperation movement against the foreign government until the wrongs of Khilafat and Jallianwala Bagh were righted and Swaraj, which Tilak envisaged first of all, was won. In order to appease the revolutionary temper of the people of India, the government made some vague and tentative offers of constitutional changes in the form of Simon Commission, which the entire nation vehemently boycotted. While opposing it, Lala Lajpat Rai, the Lion of Punjab, was killed in lathi charge by the police. Para. Mahatma Gandhi employed the weapon of civil disobedience against inhuman British laws. His historic Dandi March in 1930 to disobey the Salt Law frightened the British government. All patriots who were arrested during the Dandi March were released. After a long and difficult struggle in which countless of brave patriots sacrificed their lives, India won freedom on August 15, 1947. The partition of the Indian subcontinent was the ugly consequence of the abominable British policy of divide and rule. Stop, unquote. Para. The era of political awakening was also the epoch of Indian Renaissance, which ushered India in a glorious period of social, cultural, religious, literary, economic, and rational awakening. Raman Roy and Tilak were also great social and religious reformers. Mahatma Gandhi was a visionary. He was, quote, a social scientist who tried to analyze the ills of society and found a cure for them, unquote. He peacefully fought against all ills of society, exploitation of the poor and women, untouchability, superstition, religious bigotry, communal disharmony and economic backwardness of India. He wanted to make India a powerful, successful and vibrant democracy. Para. Influence of the spirit of the age on literature. Literature in the comprehensive expression of all areas of human experience and the spirit of the age. The epoch-making changes influenced the literature of this period. Page 440. The Gandhian influence was all-pervading on Indian English literature. The urges and the problems of the masses began to be discussed in literature in new literary forms, and styles were evolved to suit the new subjects and to make wider appeal. New literary genres, genres, which were only dimly anticipated in the previous age, now came to maturity and attained excellence. Novel, short story, autobiography, biography became important literary genres in prose. It was an era of the flowering of poetry. The adoption of English for the expression of Indian thought, culture, social life, etc. brought about a noticeable change in literary style. The process of the Indianization of English was in full swing. Indian English writers, novelists, poets, and dramatists did their best to domesticate English. Stop.